This Sunday on Capital Connection, politicians look for answers in the wake of mass shootings, tragedies gripping the nation in Boulder, Colorado and Atlanta, Georgia.
Limit assault weapons.
Senate Democrat Ram Villivalam joins us to explain how his ideas to fix the FOID might reduce violent crimes up to 40% in Illinois.
If we enact common sense gun safety policy that includes background checks, that includes obtaining fingerprinting, the statistics show that gun deaths decreased by 40%.
And Republican State Senator Terry Bryant responds with pushback how she'd like to change the FOID card. You might not expect her answer.
I don't support the FOID card in the first place.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell, reporting from the Illinois State Capitol on this Sunday, March 28th. For the second time in as many weeks, the horrific scenes of a mass shooting gripped the nation. This week in Boulder, Colorado, last week in Atlanta, Georgia. These instant flashes of immense tragedy shocking our senses that have largely grown numb or weary under the steady stream of reports of gun murder in neighborhoods that span our state. Now, calls growing louder from elected officials who are looking for answers to prevent the grief and loss of gun violence.
This is not about getting rid of the Second Amendment. It's simply about saying we need reasonable gun safety laws. There is no reason why we have assault weapons on the streets of a civil society. They are weapons of war. They are designed to kill a lot of people quickly. Let us all agree that we need background checks. But the point here is Congress needs to act. If we pass legislation, it's permanent. If the Congress acts, then it becomes law. And that is what we have lacked. That is what has been missing. We need universal background checks.
Unfortunately, we have had mass shootings in Illinois. I very much want to make sure that we're securing our families with proper gun safety legislation. Those are things that the legislature has been working on for some time. There's a lot of discussion that's gone on behind the scenes during my entire term as governor. I think that this will accelerate some of those conversations. We ought to limit assault weapons. We have to define them properly and then limit the ones, particularly ones that are repeating, where you've got bullets that are firing multiples of them in milliseconds or within a second. Those are things that we've got to do away with. Those are for no other use than killing masses of people.
Joining us now is Senator Ram Villivalam, Democrat from Chicago. It's good to have you with us. I want to first get your reaction to the news, what happened in Colorado with this most recent mass shooting. What did you see when those headlines flashed across the screen?
It was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking. We have somehow figured out how to manage this pandemic in the last 12 months and make sure people are preventing the contraction of COVID, yet we have not taken action yet on how we can address mass tragedies. It's not just Colorado. What happened in Atlanta, what happened in Chicago, what happened in East St. Louis, what happened just recently to Senator Sims in Springfield. These mass tragedies, these gun violence issues, we need to address them.
You referenced Senator Sims. We hope to hear from him soon. A gun was drawn while he was here in Springfield. That person in custody. Fortunately, no one was hurt there. Just to fill our audience in on that. When you made a comment earlier this week, and I think right now you have some legislation, there's some in the House as well, that would fix the FOID is sort of the rallying cry here, the firearm owner's identification card. But you said earlier this week that if the state were to expand background checks and implement fingerprinting or monitoring of people who have a FOID or want a FOID, that it could reduce violent crimes or gun murders by 40%, I think you said. How do you, that's a big number. How would that work? What would happen if we did those two things? Is there anything else? How do you know that it would get us to that 40% reduction in gun murders?
Absolutely. Well, the data does not lie. And what we've seen according to the research is that if we implement fingerprinting, if we do background checks, if we ensure that there's a strong licensing system in our state and make sure that the Illinois State Police have the resources they need to remove illegal guns from folks that shouldn't have them, we will reduce gun deaths and gun violence by 40%. That is what House Bill 3245 and Senate Bill 568 does. It is fixing the FOID to block illegal gun ownership.
And that includes felons. Who else should be on that list of people who should not have a gun?
Well, that is what the system and the legislation is designed to address. We want to make sure that if you own a FOID card in the state of Illinois, if we're able to obtain your fingerprint, we'll be able to identify who you are and if you should have a gun. We are not in any way trying to take away any rights of responsible gun owners.
I don't mean to ask an overly simplistic question, but isn't that right there in the name, firearm owner's identification card? If that doesn't identify the person, what does the fingerprint do in addition?
Well, the experts from law enforcement and the research that has been done by Johns Hopkins and also the Giffords Law Center shows that fingerprinting is the best way to identify someone and ensure that they should have a FOID card, they should have be able to own a gun.
I'm sure by now you've heard some pushback. There are many gun owners who feel like they are made or subjected to be a bit of a suspect, a preliminary suspect before any crime has occurred, and some chafe at that idea. Perhaps others are open to it. How do you convince gun owners that this is the best approach?
Well, first let me just say this. This legislation and the tenets of this legislation is supported by the majority of the American public. The polling shows, for example...
Well, most states don't have a FOID card. This is a specific thing to Illinois.
Sure. However, what's in this legislation in terms of background checks, for example, is supported by 90% of the American public. So number one, the American public wants to see their legislators take action. Our public safety is our number one responsibility. Number two, this legislation has been worked on by a coalition of stakeholders, coalition of constituents across the state of Illinois, which is why it has support from the Illinois State Police and other law enforcement agencies, and also has support from criminal justice advocates and faith and healthcare leaders in between. And so I would say that the broad coalition of support signifies that this has been a well thought out, based on data legislation. And again, we are trying to make the FOID card system work better. And that means, for example, when you do the fingerprinting, the Illinois State Police is able to process those FOID cards faster and move along that process for people that, quite honestly, are responsible gun owners that should not have to wait.
Mm-hmm. When we look back over the data over the last several years, from 1993 to 2013, over that 20-year span, gun murders were drastically cut in half. You mentioned trying to do that by 40%. We've seen that happen before. What do we learn from that? Do we know what caused that reduction in violent crime?
Well, I'll say that while that is a good item that happened, the reality is we still have a long way to go. What happened in Atlanta, what happened in Boulder, what happened in Chicago, what happened in East St. Louis and Springfield last week illustrates that we still need to take action. The time to act is now, and that's why we need this legislation that not only addresses obtaining fingerprinting, background checks, it makes it, enables the Illinois State Police to do their jobs better, but also, let me just say this, it provides funding for communities that have most been affected by gun violence in terms of mental health, in terms of life-saving initiatives. And so I think that strategy, the four tenets I just laid out, looks to address not only ensuring that these mass tragedies don't happen again, but also that we reduce gun violence, everyday gun violence overall.
It does get a little bit muddy when you start to consider the ongoing, I don't want to say smaller scale, but the mass shootings are sort of one aberration or one type of violent crime, and you have the other, which is just this ongoing plague of whether it's poverty or desperation or crimes happening in certain pockets. It's hard to, it doesn't seem like there's a one-size-fits-all approach to fixing all of these different iterations of violence. I don't know how you might address that.
I would say that, I would say that the legislation takes both into account, both the mass tragedies and the everyday gun violence. You look at some of my colleagues, and by the way, this legislation has the support of 20 3 of my Senate Democratic colleagues in the Illinois State Senate. But you look at some of my colleagues, like for example, Leader Jackie Collins. She supports this legislation because it does address some of the everyday gun violence that she sees in her communities on a daily basis, because of the fact that there is funding for mental health and life-saving organizations to do work in that community, because that we're able to do background checks to ensure that people that should not own a firearm should not have one.
We saw a 59% increase in mass shootings in Illinois in 2020. What happened there? What was driving that?
What is driving that is not passing responsible and common sense gun safety policy.
Well, with respect, in 2019, we didn't have those new laws on the books. In 2018 and 2017, and those numbers were sort of going down. They spiked up in 2020. Do you see any correlation to the coronavirus there driving that?
I think we can point to a number of different factors. At the end of the day, I think what constituents in our districts expect us to do is to move common sense gun safety policy forward and ensure that we're keeping them safe. We're keeping our kids safe, we're keeping our community safe. And so we can point to the stresses and the challenges of the last year. At the end of the day though, this is a problem that has been long-standing, and we're trying to find, and I think we have found, a responsible way to address this issue.
All right, I want to switch gears for a quick minute while we have you, because you do chair the Transportation Committee. You mentioned long-standing problems in Illinois. One of them is this perception, or in some cases, perhaps a reality, where our viewers may know billions of dollars flows through the Department of Transportation every year. A lot of this goes towards repairing roads or repairing bridges, and sometimes there has been, in years past, favoritism, or this idea that a politician could phone in a favor to the Department of Transportation or apply a little pressure here to get the project in their district done. And then other less clouded areas of the state might not see that priority or attention to the roads in their district. You have a solution for that? What is it?
I appreciate the question. What our taxpayers deserve and need is transparency and equity. And I'm proud to say that I've worked with Representative Cam Buckner in the House and stakeholders across the state, from the Civic Fed to the Transit Equity Network, to ensure that we move legislation forward that makes it so we're looking at the capital plan, the Rebuild Illinois capital plan, in a performance-based planning way. And I am proud to say that the Illinois Department of Transportation is working with us to get this done. We need transparency. We also need equity. One statistic that I always point to is 95 out of the top 100 Chicago area region transit commutes, 95 out of the top 100 longest commutes in the Chicago area region are from Black and Latino communities. So what does that mean? That makes it harder for them to get to their job, their hospital, their school, and that's what we need to solve.
Do I understand your bill correctly, that it would basically more or less take the decision-making process or the priority ranking process out of the hands of a bureaucrat or a person and into an algorithm, where it would spit out and say, okay, we're going to take a number of factors into consideration here, and then the computer is going to basically tell the Department of Transportation which project to begin first. Is that right?
Well, it's more intended to provide transparency on their process in terms of how they prioritize projects as part of the multi-year plan, and ensure that they obtain public input as part of that. And then also, though, it adds factors like equity and environmental to that equation. And so we believe the Illinois Department of Transportation should be able to do their job and execute the $45 billion Rebuild Illinois capital plan. However, we strongly believe that it needs to be done in a transparent way, and that they need to include these other factors that may be on a spreadsheet or as a bullet point right now, but really need to be prioritized as they put the projects in the multi-year plan.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest in who goes first and which projects get done first. I guess one question, under this system, would a lawmaker still be able to lobby effectively the Department of Transportation? Could they still pick up the phone and say, hey, you got to take a look at this?
Well, let me say this. We were elected by, in the Senate, 217,000 people to advocate on their behalf. And so I think there are going to be conversations about those priorities in each person's district. That being said, we have instances right now where there's not even transparency for legislators. One example is there's a colleague of mine who has a project in her district that has been in the out year of the multi-year plan for 22 years. And she has asked repeatedly, when is this project going to be prioritized? And so when I say transparency, I first mean for the taxpayers, then I also mean for people that represent the taxpayers, like us. I know that there's this assumption that we make a call and then the project gets prioritized. That is not even the case. And so I would say that the transparency piece and the equity piece is for all of us, for the taxpayers, for the department, and for legislators to ensure that we know what's happening and how we're getting there.
All right, Senator Ram Villivalam, I think your first time with us on Capitol Connection. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to watching these debates unfold in committee and on the floor of the Senate.
Thank you very much.
We're back in just a moment with Senator Terry Bryant. Stick around.